A document has just come to light publicly that completely changes the way we understand this investigation. It's not exactly because of what it reveals about the agent's findings, but because of the exact words the investigators decided to put on paper long before they boarded the Soulmate with their evidence bags. CBS News obtained and analyzed that document, a search warrant, executed directly on Brian Hooker's yacht. And that warrant doesn't leave much room for doubt. It coldly details what the police went looking for. It lists the specific categories of the devices they removed from the vessel, but hidden within the legal justification, there appears a phrase that tells us exactly what the authorities think about the fate of Lynette Hooker. We're going to break down that warrant line by line, device by device, and word by word, because here the details are the only thing that matters. The order in which we look at the data also counts. You already know this case. You've been following the story from the beginning. For that reason, we're not going to waste time reintroducing Lynette or explaining the basic timeline from scratch. What we will do is take a deeper look at that legal document reviewed by CBS News to understand the real weight of each item seized. We'll analyze what former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek when she pointed to that single piece of information. That trail she most wants investigators to examine thoroughly, and also what that specific phrase in the warrant is screaming at us. About how the police have classified what happened to Lynette on that April 5th. That phrase is the reason we're here today. And we're going to get to it cautiously, because hearing it in its full context after understanding what was taken, why those devices are key, and what they had to present to a judge to get authorization. Those words are going to hit very differently. Don't tune out. This gets really murky. Everything you're about to hear comes from identified official sources and public documents that have been verified. When information comes from a single source or as an analytical deduction, we'll make that crystal clear for everyone. CBS News confirmed on April 14, 2026, that it had finally obtained and reviewed the search warrant. The document executed on the Soulmate. That confirmation is vital because a search warrant is not a simple press release. It's not an attorney's statement. It's a sworn legal document that investigators had to present before a judge. They had to defend their arguments before getting permission to board that vessel and remove any item from inside. For a warrant like this to be issued, the police must establish probable cause. They must convince an impartial judicial officer that there are reasonable grounds to believe that specific items in an exact location constitute evidence of a crime, or that they will help solve it. This is not an automatic rubber stamp. It's a very rigorous legal threshold. And the Bahamian authorities, coordinating with the investigators on the case, cleared that threshold before anyone set foot on the Soulmate with the intent to seize property. This means that the warrant itself represents the theory of the investigation. At that point, the agents had already gathered enough information from interviews from the scene and from Brian Hooker's own account. With all the evidence accumulated up to, then they appeared before the judge to make their case. They argued that those devices on that particular yacht likely contained evidence about what happened to Lynette. They weren't guessing or taking a shot in the dark. They had what they needed to establish probable cause, and the judge agreed. The computers and phones aboard this sailboat owned by Brian and Lynette Hooker, called the Soulmate, might contain evidence related to the disappearance of the Michigan woman. According to the document reviewed by CBS News, the Soulmate is no modest vessel. It's a yacht. The kind of boat that comes equipped with systems, connectivity, and electronics that document and record everything, and store it all. The investigators knew what they were looking for before they arrived. The precision of the list in the warrant confirms that. They were going after those devices seized. The warrant, reviewed by CBS News, authorized the agents to remove several items from the Soulmate. The first was a digital video recorder. The second, several electronic tablets. The third included equipment and accessories related to cell phones. Let's break down each one of these points. Because the decision to specify each one by category, instead of using a generic term like electronic devices, tells us a lot about what the investigators expected to find, and why they wanted it so urgently. The digital video recorder. Modern yachts of the Soulmate's class are not simple or rudimentary boats. They are equipped with systems that include surveillance cameras, integrated navigation logs, and digital video recorders, designed to capture and save footage from multiple cameras positioned at strategic points all over the boat. A digital video recorder stores the footage depending on its memory capacity and the resolution at which it records. That system is capable of storing days or even weeks of recordings before the new footage starts to overwrite the old. For those investigating the case, this opens up a crucial window of time. It's a deep look at everything that was happening on that yacht, and around it before, during, and after that, April 5th. Let's think about the kind of evidence that could be saved on the hard drive of the surveillance equipment aboard the Soulmate. The stern cameras, for example. Those could have recorded exactly who was getting on or off the dinghy, and most importantly, at what exact moment they were doing it. Other lenses pointing toward the dock or directly at the water would reveal what was happening in the immediate surroundings of the vessel during those critical hours of the night. From the main cabin to the deck or the flybridge. Every angle, no matter how small, tells a different part of this story. The boat is the key piece of what happened that April 5th. We know for certain that Lynette and Brian were coming back from dinner. That return trip was made in the dinghy, that small, rigid-hull inflatable boat commonly used to transport passengers. It's the transport that moves them between the dock and the yacht, when the latter is anchored or moored far from the main shore. But what really happened during that boat ride? What happened just before or after? That is the heart of the mystery. If the Soulmate's recorder captured anything from that night, whether the trip out to dinner or the moment of returning to the dock, it would be pure gold for the case. The experts are looking for any sign of someone approaching the boat or any unusual movement in the water. They need to see it all. They examine every frame, every timestamp, and every second of video that was left on the device when they boarded the yacht. But watch out, they're also interested in what isn't there. A surveillance system with deleted files is in itself incriminating evidence. Missing chunks where by pure logic, there should be recordings. Well, that's something a forensic expert can easily prove. The tablets and the phones are the digital paper trail. If the cameras are the eyes of the case, these devices are the mind of those involved. Inside them, hide the conversations, the true intentions, the plans, the internet searches, and even the history of activity on social media. Permanently erasing that information is a monumental task, almost impossible for anyone who has actually used those devices. Imagine what investigators find when they start the deep forensic analysis of each one of those devices. Text messages, all of them, the ones that are still there, and in many cases also, the ones someone tried to make disappear at all costs. The digital tools the police use today are astonishingly effective at recovering deleted messages from physical memory. Of course, it all depends on how much time has passed since they were deleted and how much the phone was used afterward. They're not just looking for the content of the conversations, but also the timing. What exactly were they talking about before that fateful April 5th? What did they say to each other in the hours after Lynette's disappearance? The call log shows who dialed and who answered. They look at how long each conversation lasted and the exact second it happened, especially those calls made in the middle of the initial chaos. Sometimes these calls end up revealing much more than the caller intended. Who you call first after a tragedy, that matters, and a lot. The order is vital. Did they call a lawyer before search and rescue teams? That detail can change everything. They check emails, social media, and apps like WhatsApp, Signal, or Telegram. Even Instagram and Facebook Messenger chats go under the microscope. Each app stores data in its own way. Some are much harder to crack than a simple traditional text message. But forensic technology has become incredibly sophisticated. What someone thinks they've wiped from the device usually turns up sooner or later. This is done by digging into the app's temporary files, or the cloud backups. And then comes the GPS trail. Perhaps this is the heaviest piece of information of all. Modern smartphones track us every step of the way continuously. They do it through GPS cell towers, nearby Wi-Fi networks, and the location logs of every installed app. With all of that, investigators can reconstruct, almost with pinpoint precision, where each phone was during that entire night. They're going to follow the trail of Brian's phone during the key hours of April 5th and see where it moved afterward. Did it hit the water at any point? Did it move following patterns that match his version of events? That's what they're trying to confirm. Photos and videos aren't off limits either. Every image captured on a device hides digital metadata that tells its own version. That data says exactly when the photo was taken, the exact location, and even the technical configuration of the phone at that instant. Changing that information requires very specific tools, and if someone tries, it leaves a trace that a forensic expert will spot immediately. When reviewing the gallery, the agents don't just look at the image. They analyze the precise moment when it was captured. They ask themselves if there were files deleted after April 5th. They check personal notes and even financial apps. They scan the calendar and the money transactions. But the most unsettling, without a doubt, is the Google search history. This is where Jennifer Coffindaffer and the topic of Google searches comes in. When Newsweek sought an expert opinion, they spoke with her. They consulted Jennifer Coffindaffer about the Lynette Hooker case. She is a retired FBI special agent. Coffindaffer has a very long track record in investigations where digital evidence ends up being the factor that decides a suspect's fate. When asked what investigators should prioritize, she didn't hesitate. She was direct and extremely specific. They have to check his Google searches, she declared. She's urging them to find out what trail the suspect left online. It's a devastating statement in its simplicity because it hits at the central nerve of all the digital evidence in this case. What was Brian Hooker really looking up? What questions did he pose to the search engine before that fateful April 5th? What kind of information was he trying to get? Coffindaffer stays silent about the contents of those devices. She doesn't give anything away. She can't know for sure. No one outside the inner circle of the investigation has access to that yet. What she does is speak from her experience as a federal agent, pointing out precisely which data tends to be the most revealing. And the reason why Google history is such powerful evidence turns out curiously to be the simplest. We confess things to our phones that we wouldn't dare tell any other human being. Today we use search engines the way people used to consult a trusted counselor or leaf through a book in the solitude of a library. We type questions that we're too afraid or too embarrassed to say out loud. We research the forbidden, what nobody should know about us. And we do it out of habit, believing we're alone. It feels like tossing a question into the air in a room with no witnesses. But that's not how it works. Every query passes through a server, gets linked to an account or a device, and is archived forever in the history. That record can span weeks, months, or years, and it survives even if you wipe the phone as long as it's linked to the cloud. Forensic analysts dissect it to later present it in court as evidence of intent of something planned in cold blood. What Coffindaffer raises is whether Brian Hooker researched something that under this new light takes on a macabre meaning. It's not a direct accusation yet. It's more about framing the logical question that drives the entire criminal investigation. And now that question has an answer, simply because the detectives already have the devices in their possession. That a former agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation with that kind of track record is putting the focus on Google is a clear signal. It indicates where the case is heading. They're not looking for an accident or a cruel twist of fate. They're looking for evidence of premeditation. They want to know what Brian Hooker knew, what he planned, and what he did, someone who so far denies having committed any crime. That's the official position communicated by his attorney, Terrell Butler, who has been the spokesperson in this process. He has flatly rejected the charges. Brian's version focuses exclusively on what happened that April 5th. The couple had gone out to dinner that night. It's a detail verified by multiple reports that no one disputes. The usual unknown is what happened upon returning to the dock when they tried to board the Soulmate again. At sea, and especially in the Bahamas, where the waters are dark and the currents treacherous, real accidents do happen. People fall overboard. And the ocean sometimes decides never to return its victims. Those are facts. And they are also the foundations on which any defense attorney would build their arguments in this situation. But Brian's defense runs into a reality. The investigators' decisions point in a very different direction. The arrest on probable cause was the first step. Then came the court order to seize those specific electronic devices. And the language used in that warrant, which we'll analyze in a moment, represents the third red flag. In the chasm that separates a tragic accident from a premeditated crime is where this investigation is breathing right now. And the digital evidence that the agents now have could be the key that either closes or widens that gap for good. Let's look at the timeline of April 5th under the relentless lens of the technological evidence. You already know the hours, but let's look at it according to the warrant. Every point on that clock is a moment captured in time. Before dinner. Where were Brian and Lynette? What were they really doing aboard the Soulmate that afternoon? The trail of their phones will say exactly where each one was during all of April 5th, not just at the restaurant. If there were suspicious messages, calls, or searches early that day, it all got logged with exact time and coordinates. During dinner, the couple was out. Any communication made in that stretch of time, if it exists, is already in the system. Their credit card transactions will confirm where they were and at what precise moment, with total accuracy. The GPS on their cell phones will help confirm whether both devices stayed together throughout the entire evening or if they separated. On the way back to the dock, we reach the breaking point. The instant the couple leaves dry land to return to the water. They began the trip back to the Soulmate. That movement was drawn step by step in the location data from their cell phones. Any text or call in that critical period got recorded. And then the boat. That's the instant when everything stops. That little vessel that was supposed to take them back to the Soulmate. What happened inside or near that boat is precisely the heart of this mystery. If the Soulmate's video system recorded anything from that time, the dinghy approaching for example, or some trace in the water, or any unusual movement outside the boat, we'd be looking at evidence of incalculable value. After Lynette's disappearance, Brian's actions in those critical moments become suspiciously relevant. The police analyze with a magnifying glass what a person does in the first minutes, hours, and days after an inexplicable absence. The order of the calls, what the messages said, where the cell phone moved, and what he searched online during that time, or whether he tried to delete anything. Digital evidence has the power to answer questions at each one of those breaking points. That's why they arrived at the Soulmate with a court order to seize those particular electronic devices. Forensic analysis reveals what can be recovered, and why it's worth understanding how computer forensics works today. There's a mistaken idea that a deleted piece of data disappears on the spot. In most cases, the reality is different. When you delete a file from a digital device under normal conditions, what gets removed is not the information itself, but the pointer, that index that tells the operating system where in memory the data is stored. The information usually stays there intact until the system needs that space to write something new and ends up overwriting it. The tools the police use can scan storage at a very deep level, almost invisible. They bypass the system's normal index and recover files or data that at first glance appear to have been deleted forever. This works for messages, photos, app data, and even search histories. But watch out, you can't always recover everything. It all depends on how much new information was saved after deletion, and what method was used to try to hide it. Even so, experts have managed to dig up data from phones, months, or even years after someone hit the delete button. Those findings have been the basis for winning complex trials. And the cloud adds another dimension to the suspect's problem. If the devices were synced with remote servers, what was deleted on the phone could still be living happily in a backup, although getting in there requires a different legal process. Additional warrants are needed for the service providers, but investigators with experience in digital crimes are already on it. The work of analyzing what they took from the Soulmate is not something that gets resolved overnight. A detailed forensic inspection of several devices can take weeks or even months, and that affects the timeline of the investigation. The seizure is a confirmed fact. What they found there, if anything, remains under wraps and will take time to come to light. That court order was not the end of the road. It was the start of a phase that could give us the strongest piece of evidence in the entire case. It's a matter of patterns and strategic decisions. There's a basic principle: when there's no clear physical evidence, the investigators' priorities reveal a lot. Where they decide to look and what they choose to investigate first tells us almost as much as the actual evidence they're searching for. By April 14, 2026, when news of the warrant broke, the police had already made decisions of great weight. They had arrested Brian Hooker, based on probable cause. They didn't treat it as a simple accident at sea. They kept putting the puzzle together, piling up clues, and moving the legal machinery toward a criminal indictment, instead of accepting the theory of a chance event. Requesting a warrant for the digital devices was no doubt one of those key moves on the board. Ron Marenfeld, Karen Stark, and Randy Kessler have weighed in on this drama at different points. The consensus among the experts is that this case has markings that set it apart from a common accident, and the police's actions confirm that suspicion. The pace at which they're moving suggests they know they're heading towards something big, and that the contents of those phones or computers could be the final piece. It's the role of expert analysis. Several specialists with credentials have analyzed the case based on what they've seen in decades of dealing with similar crimes. You have to listen to their commentary carefully, but also with caution. There's a fine line between what an expert deduces from experience and what the investigators have officially confirmed in this file. What Jennifer Coffindaffer explains about the Google searches is above all a technical analysis. It's her perspective based on her years at the FBI, on what the police should be tracking right now. She's not saying they've already found something shady on Brian Hooker's cell phone. It's more of a lesson on how a criminal case is built from the shadows so the public can understand it. That difference is crucial. In a case with such emotional weight, it's extremely easy for the line between what experts recommend and what has actually been proven to get blurred. What is a fact beyond any assumption or inference is this: CBS News confirmed the existence of the court order. The document details every item seized. But in addition, it contains very specific terms that explain why those particular devices were being sought. Those words are already part of the public record. Everything else, the contents of the devices and what the agents found inside, is still under lock and key. What charges will be filed, if any end up being filed, is something that will only be determined through the legal process and the investigation that continues to unfold. In covering this case, our priority has been accuracy, separating the proven facts from the defense's stance and from the complex legal path that still lies ahead. Terrell Butler, Brian Hooker's attorney, has been blunt about it. His client denies any kind of responsibility or wrongdoing. It's the logical legal position at this point. It simply represents Brian's fundamental right under the justice system that governs this process. If the case moves forward to formal charges, the defense will likely attack on several predictable but quite significant fronts over the coming months. On digital evidence, it's common for attorneys to question the way the equipment was seized. They're always looking for a crack in the procedure. They're going to put the chain of custody after the seizure under the microscope, along with the forensic methods used to extract and dissect the information. And of course, they'll question how that data the investigators consider relevant to the case is being interpreted. Digital evidence is a powerful tool, yes. But it's not untouchable or immune to challenges. For the defense, the warrant is key because it puts the theory of the investigation in writing before the evidence was even examined. It's a preview map. If the forensic findings match what the warrant says, that alignment would give enormous strength to the prosecution's case. But if they don't match, or if the devices don't turn up anything useful or even support Brian's version, the story changes completely. In that scenario, the investigators would have to face a very tough question: where do we go now? The road is still long. The digital evidence could be a decisive chapter, but we're very far from reading the end of this mystery. The revelation causing bodily harm. We've already analyzed the court order point by point. We reviewed every device listed in the document and what each one might be hiding in its internal memory. We heard Jennifer Coffindaffer explain what she's most interested in the experts examining in depth. We talked about what forensic analysis can recover and how it does it. Now let's focus on the language of the search warrant that CBS News reviewed. Executed on the Soulmate to seize a digital video recorder, tablets, and phone accessories, the document includes a very clear justification clause. That clause states that the seized items could be material evidence for the case. And this is where the words get heavy. These are the exact phrases that CBS News confirmed from the court order. Material evidence, or content of material evidence related to a missing person causing bodily harm. Read it again: causing bodily harm. Those three words at the end carry the full weight of the official suspicion: causing bodily harm. Let's be meticulous here. That phrase is not a criminal charge yet. It's not a verdict of guilt or a definitive conclusion. It's not a conviction. It's justification language within a court order, nothing more and nothing less. It's the legal argument the investigators gave a judge to explain why they needed those items. It's the articulation of their suspicion. And what it says is the following. The agents believe that those devices could contain evidence that Lynette Hooker was physically harmed. Pay attention, they're not talking about an accident. It's not evidence of a fall. It's not that kind of maritime tragedy where lives are lost by a twist of fate without malicious intent. They're talking about physical harm inflicted. The word causing in that sentence implies will. It implies a deliberate action by someone. It suggests that someone did something. And believe me, investigators don't choose the words of a search warrant at random. They're not careless. That language has to convince a judge. It has to be specific enough to justify the invasion of privacy and property that a warrant involves. What's more, it has to be a faithful reflection of the theory the prosecution is working with at this moment. Because if they get a warrant on one pretext and then investigate something else, all the evidence could be thrown out at trial. The phrase causing bodily harm is not a drafting mistake or a semantic coincidence. It's a deliberate and legally analyzed description of what the police believe actually happened to Lynette Hooker. Think about it. The investigators sat down to write this, knowing perfectly well that a judge would read it from top to bottom. They chose to define their suspicion by saying those devices contain evidence of bodily harm inflicted on a missing person. It was a conscious choice. They had other options. They could have used neutral language, something that fit with a simple boating accident. But they didn't. They wrote it out plain and clear, causing bodily harm. That's the official stance set down in legal ink, endorsed by a judge and now confirmed by CBS News for the public record. There is suspicion that something dark happened to Lynette Hooker. That's why investigators believe the seized devices hold the digital trail of that something. The question Jennifer Coffindaffer raises is chilling in its simplicity. What was Brian Hooker searching for online? That question feels much heavier after reading the court order, because now we understand the framework under which the police are dissecting every search. They're not trying to find evidence of an unfortunate accident. They're looking for signs of intent, of a meticulous plan, and of prior knowledge. The DVR videos, the text messages, the logs of every call. Of the location data, the app history, and all those Google queries. Every fragment of information on those devices is being analyzed under 3 brutal words, causing bodily harm. That's what the court order dictates. What comes next? The investigation is at its peak. The devices are in forensic custody. And Brian Hooker's arrest on probable cause means the police had already cleared a critical legal threshold even before executing the search. Arresting on probable cause implies they presented enough evidence to establish a reasonable basis that Brian Hooker did in fact commit a crime. It's a different standard than a final conviction, but believe me, it's not a simple requirement to meet. The next step will depend to a great extent on what the digital innards of those seized devices reveal. If they find evidence supporting the theory of a premeditated act against Lynette, the path to formal charges will be much clearer and more direct. Meanwhile, the physical search to find Lynette continues in parallel. Successful convictions have been obtained without recovering the victim's body, as long as the rest of the evidence is strong enough. For Lynette's family, every new development is at the same time a relief and a torment. It's progress, because it means that justice is finally moving. But it's pain, because every new piece of information reminds them of what they lost, and what perhaps they may never fully recover. We'll keep following every twist of this case closely as the truth continues to come out. Every verified update will be covered here with the same rigor and commitment to separating what we know from what we are simply deducing. If this case matters to you, and the fact that you're here proves it, subscribe so you don't miss a single detail of the investigation. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these in-depth and detailed analyses of the cases that really matter. We'll be back with more information very soon. That house has already let go of some secrets. Now we're going to find out what other mysteries it's hiding. This video has been produced for informational and educational purposes only. All statements are based on public reports, identified official sources, and verified legal documents. As of the time of this publication, no person has been convicted of any crime related to the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. All those mentioned are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Lynette's disappearance remains an active investigation. If you have any information that could help investigators, please contact the relevant authorities. We send our deepest condolences and solidarity to Lynette Hooker's family and loved ones. Sources cited include CBS News, Newsweek, and expert commentary. Links to the original reports are available in the description. Brian, any message about the search for your wife? Any comment on finding your wife? Excuse me. Thank you very much.